It's true that I have made a fair number of videos criticising games and game developers when they fail to implement decent key rebinding on PC games. I will hold my hands up and say, yes, this has become something of a thing for me. It is now my thing. And I will accept that this issue is probably more important to me than it is for the average gamer. However, I have been seeing a number of comments from apologists trying to make excuses for these games and for the game developers who fail in such epic manners. People trying to belittle the importance of this issue. People trying to make out that this issue is a complicated one and that it's difficult for these game developers to fix, to get right, and that perhaps I should shut up about this because, and I'm not quoting here, but I'm coming close to quoting many people, nobody cares about it except you. You're the only one who wants to rebind keys, especially the movement keys. And if that was true, you might actually have a point. If this was in fact some niche feature that was fairly difficult to implement and not a lot of people used, you might have a point about me essentially being the only one complaining about it. But it's not a niche feature. It's an expected feature. It's not difficult to achieve. It's not technically demanding. It's pretty damn trivial compared to all of the other aspects of game development. And you are very wrong about me being the only person caring about this feature. You only had to pause for a few seconds to read the comments below the various videos I've made on this subject before posting your own comment about how I'm the only person who cares to have seen a lot of other people who apparently care quite passionately. Left-handed gamers, for example. If you just think about it for a second now, put your hand on your mouse and your keyboard and now swap them around, you can probably see why left-handed gamers might want to move the movement keys. They might want to rebind several keys if they were going to match the sort of setup that you have, because they're using mirrored hands. Now, I don't know for sure how many left-handed people there are in the world, but I do know it's enough that people who make mouses, is it mice or mouses? Whatever, the peripheral that you look around with while playing a game, they make it for left-handed people as well. There are plenty of mice made for left-handers, or mice that can be adapted for both right-hand and left-hand play. And if there are companies out there willing to make hardware, there's enough people who want to buy that hardware, which means there are enough people who would probably appreciate being able to change the movement keys to the other side of the keyboard so that they could have a similar setup to right-handers. Then, of course, there are those for whom WASD makes no sense on their keyboard, regardless of which hand they use, because they are not using a US layout QWERTY keyboard. I know, sit down, hold on to something, have a stiff drink, but apparently not everybody in the world uses a US QWERTY layout keyboard. Now, a lot of people use some variation on the QWERTY keyboard. I actually use a Norwegian QWERTY keyboard. But even though it is a QWERTY keyboard, so the movement keys would be okay for me, several other keys are in different places. For example, the plus key. So it is possible that for a lot of games that are using way more keys, being able to rebind would be useful even if I was using this particular Norwegian QWERTY keyboard. And then there's the AZERTY keyboard, which I believe is still fairly popular in France and a few other nations. Now, I'm a Brit and we've been at war with the French on and off for about 1,000 bloody years, and even I would say, you know what, we should support French gamers because French gamers have money and we want them to buy our bloody game. You know, and if they've got an AZERTY keyboard at home, they don't want to have to go out and buy a special keyboard just for gaming, a QWERTY keyboard just for gaming. Although I believe there is some pressure to switch to the QWERTY keyboard in France anyway. I don't know for sure. I did a bit of reading on it. I couldn't tell. I can't for the life of me imagine French people giving up something that was different just to fit in with the rest of the world. That sounds massively out of character to me. Then there are people who really have difficulty, you know, pressing the WASD keys because they're too close together or they're in a funny position. And so they like to rebind them for their own hand size, or perhaps they've got some sort of injury and they want to space the keys out more, or perhaps they're using a one-handed keyboard like I use that has much larger arrow keys that are just much more comfortable to press when gaming and allow me to play for longer sessions, because I suffer from like tension in my hand if I sit playing on a QWERTY keyboard for long periods, whereas on my one-handed keyboard my fingers are much more widely spaced on the larger buttons. So there's people like me. And then there are people who, well, quite like where WASD is, don't mind that layout, but they prefer to move it across a bit, so it's ESDF. So they've got a few more keys to the left-hand side of their fingers because they like a few more keys there to give more options. They just like it that way. And that's the thing with PC gaming. They get to do that. They get to have these options because one of the strengths of a PC and in this case a keyboard is you have a lot of options, a lot of buttons, and you can set it up the way you want because, and this is going to shock some of you, key rebinding is an expected feature on a PC game. It's not an optional extra. It's not a, oh, that would be nice to have. It's just expected. More than pretty much any other feature I could think of beyond the ability to invert Y. Don't get me started on that subject. Completely different videos worth. Oh, and I absolutely know for a fact there are going to be people coming up with the argument, but you could just use a third-party program to fix this, or you should get a one-handed keyboard that's got reprogrammable keys. Yeah, I actually bought one of those, a one-handed keyboard where the keys were reprogrammable. I just don't find it as comfortable as this really ancient one-handed keyboard that I cannot reprogram the keys for, but I did do it. Yes, I did go out and spend some money because there are some games out there that failed at key rebinds. And yes, for certain games, I have used something like Auto Hotkey to fix the failures that those game developers have done. So yes, I can fix this, but that does not make it better. That does not make it better. It makes it worse. The fact that somebody at home with an expensive piece of hardware or a bit of tinkering and a couple of hours of tweaking the scripts can fix something the developer failed to fix does not look good for those developers. I should not have to fix the key rebinds for a game developer, and I certainly should not have to buy a programmable keyboard to get around their failures. The fact that I can fix these issues, and usually do in all of the games that I play, does not mitigate the problem. It highlights how bloody incompetent the developers are. And at this point you might be wondering why I'm so passionate about this and why I am so dismissive of games companies who cannot get it right. Why I will call them out even when I love those game companies and the game they have made. Because yes, I've even complained about games that I adored when they have got it wrong, even slightly, even games like Witcher 3 that didn't do the worst job of key rebinds. I could rebind the movement keys, for example, but it did hard code some keys when it first came out. And yes, I criticized it. So why am I so passionate about this particular feature? Why am I so angry when they fail at this feature? Well, that's because it's such a bloody easy thing to get right that I am stunned and amazed that they haven't got it right. This is not the same as, well, there's a small graphical bug if you have more than 10 million objects on screen or something like that. This is a very simple feature to implement unless you have got very lax coding standards. I'll be honest with you, in 99 out of 100 instances of failed key rebinds, it usually looks like they've hard-coded the key for something. They've committed a cardinal sin and they've hard-coded the key. That's what it looks like most of the time. Sometimes it could just be terrible design decisions when implementing the keyboard controls, but that's still terrible. There's no real excuse for terrible implementation of a keyboard on a PC game. I know there are people out there who like to defend certain games and say, well, they weren't designed for a keyboard in mind, and this is total claptrap. I mean, yes, keyboards have some disadvantages in some games in the fact that they are digital. You know, the keys pressed are on and off, and so if you're using them for movement, you don't get the same analog control over, you know, the speed you move left and right, backwards and forwards. And for things like driving games, I will grant you the keyboard is a terrible device. For flight sims, it's a terrible device. It really is. Hands down, not going to argue with that. But none of the games I play, not one of them, falls into that category. And I don't care whether you personally prefer to play with a controller. Like you play Dark Souls and you think, no, I play so much better on a controller. That's fine. You can play it so much better. But this idea that there's something mystically magical about the game that doesn't work with mouse and keyboard is just that. It's mystical BS that really only exists because apologists for that game pretty much made it up. And they did. And I know they did because I managed to fix Dark Souls 2's issues. The issues I had with its terrible keyboard and mouse implementation, I managed to fix with third-party tools. Took me a couple of hours messing around, auto hotkey, a few other things, and I got it working perfectly as I needed it to work. Right? No problems. And Dark Souls 3, I didn't even need to do that because finally the developer learned how to do a mouse and keyboard interface and it worked perfectly. I didn't need to touch anything on Dark Souls 3. I could just jump in and start playing, rebind the keys as needed, no trouble, no third-party tools, no tweaking needed from me, no modding needed from me. It worked right out of the box. There's no magical, mystical reason that type of game can't work with mouse and keyboard beyond incompetence. Don't like that because you like that game, you like that game developer. Tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. When developers make PC games and fail the keyboard and mouse implementation, it is 99.9% of the time a failure on their part. If they're making a driving game or a flight sim, I will accept that is a lot tougher to get right on keyboard and mouse, although lots of companies do it, make it okay. I mean, I wouldn't play Elite without a joystick, and I probably, if I was playing a Formula 1 driving game, I'd buy a steering wheel. I really would. And if I didn't have a steering wheel, I might actually play with a controller, and I suck with controller. It's just that sort of a game where the controller is probably... It's the analog movement. It really is the analog movement. But beyond that, the stuff I'm complaining about, the key rebinds issue, sorry, no excuses. Stop apologizing for these companies and stop demanding that I shut up about this, because I'm not going to. There are plenty of people who agree with me, and there are plenty of people who don't want to buy a game if they're forced to use keys they don't like. And they have a right to know. I got one comment from someone saying, oh, you should not have done a review for this game because it was a game designed to be played with a controller, and you should have presented the game at its best by playing it with a controller and reviewing it with a controller. No, it's not my job to present these games at their best. Even if I was a reviewer, I would actually argue that as a reviewer, it is my job to present these games not at their best, but actually as they are for the various people who will be interested in playing them. In this case, I'm probably the sort of reviewer people will go to if they are hardcore mouse, keyboard, PC gamers and want a review. And if they watch my review and they don't care about key rebinds, or they don't care about terrible mouse and keyboard implementation because they intend to use a controller, they'll take that into account and dismiss that criticism and go ahead and buy the game. But those that find that side of things important, they have a right to know that. It is, you cannot say it's wrong of me to tell these people, oh, by the way, there might be something about this game that you hate, and it's this, because you think that's putting a game in the wrong light. No, hell no. Now, before I go, I do want to say I do appreciate that the keyboard is not the world's greatest gaming peripheral. The mouse is. The mouse, by sheer accident, turned out to be one of the greatest peripherals for gaming ever. It's brilliant for RTS games, it's brilliant for games that have a lot of click and point, it's brilliant for games that have a lot of inventory management, but the big shock, of course, was it's absolutely superb for first-person shooters. It's awesome. You look at the average gaming mouse, it's very advanced, it's very flashy, but it's still essentially pretty much the same kind of device we had when mice first appeared, just slightly cooler looking. Keyboards, they're just not quite there, are they? We know this by the fact that we keep trying to make gaming keyboards that make up for its many weaknesses. You know, the lack of analog input. It is a weakness. There's no way around it. And I've often said, one of the best ways I could imagine playing a first-person shooter game or a game like Skyrim is to have a controller in my left hand that was one-handed, that allowed me to do the left, right, forward, backwards movement, allowed me to have a D-pad and maybe a bunch of buttons, my fingers to press and a trigger to press if I want. Loads of little options and then the mouse for looking. I've actually tried to play some games that'll actually support mouse and controller by doing that. And it's not actually that hard. It takes a bit of getting used to. And it's very hard to get a position holding a full-size controller in one hand that's comfortable for long periods without sort of, balancing it against something. So I will accept that the keyboard, if we could replace it, I would. I'd go for that. I'd go for a one-handed controller. Maybe there is one out there and it just hasn't built up any momentum. And I think that's a shame. And we're sort of, the keyboard is a bit of a crutch for a lot of games. Now, for some games, it's perfect. Games where you don't have to press keys for long periods of time. You know, games that are not first-person shooters, where you've got your finger on the W key, and you've got your finger on the W key, and you don't want to move it, but you want to press a weapon change key, so you're trying to stretch your pinky up to press something, at the same time of jumping over a platform, so you're having to hit with your thumb key. So you're keeping one finger on the W key, and stamming down with the thumb, and reaching across with the pinky. You know, games like that, the keyboard's not brilliant for. Games like XCOM, that's a game where you press a specific key just once with your index finger. You know, you could actually use your nose to play that game. For the games like that, the keyboard's actually perfect. But for a lot of games, I do totally 100% get that it is far from perfect. It's just, unfortunately, it is the device that's paired alongside mouse for a lot of gaming. When that changes, maybe my passion for key rebinds will also change. Maybe I will say, you know what? It's time. Let's retire the keyboard. But I will not be retiring my keyboard until such an option is there, because I will not be retiring from my mouse. I will not be retiring from my mouse for a lot of games. And this means, until then, games companies who wish to make games for the PC market, or even port their game across from one console to the PC, are going to have to get this very simple and expected feature right. Because I do not accept the apologetics argument that, well, this game was designed for the Xbox. You should expect it to not work as well on PC. No, I shouldn't. When I pay for a game on a PC, I expect that game to work on my PC as a PC game. And if the game developer has failed to do that, I will criticize them. I will point it out, and I will warn other PC gamers that if they are the sort of people who require mouse and keyboard and do enjoy key rebinds, especially if it's the movement keys, and that game just doesn't handle it well, I will be informing those people so they can make an informed decision as to whether they want to spend their money. Because PC gamers do not spend money on PC games because they liked it on the Xbox. They don't go, oh, that game on the Xbox is great, I'll buy it on PC. If they were happy with it on the Xbox, with the Xbox controller, they'd stick with it on the Xbox. If they've bought it for the PC and they're going to use a controller, they don't care. They don't care. They're not going to mind if I warn them, if I say, oh, by the way, if you're playing this on PC and you do intend using mouse and keyboard, don't do it. They're going to think, well, I don't. So thank you for the warning. Moving right on. So what I'm saying in the end, I guess, is no, I'm not going to stop complaining about crappy key rebinds.